Fabulous. Well, good afternoon to you all. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a great honor and pleasure to be part of this event. I was able to be here in November as part of the Ecosystem Services Forum as well. So this is a nice invitation back. And I'm sorry that I missed a few of the presentations this morning. I had another event downtown with NOAA discussing fisheries management. So that is top of mind for me today. So I'm going to be talking a lot about fisheries. But that's really is my specialty. I come to this forum today really from the food production side of things. I was a chef for many years. I didn't take the most traditional path to where I am now. I was a chef for many years and then working as an explorer with National Geographic, focusing on the confluence of ecological and human health and how conservation impacts societies and impacts individuals. And so from there, I'm now with the Center for Health and Global Environment at Harvard School of Public Health with Dr. Jack Spangler, and doing a lot of the work there, outreach to corporations, to large-scale food service suppliers to help make sense of a lot of the confounding messages that are out there. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. But really, I also want to say that I'm really thrilled by the conversations that I'm hearing happening, linking environmental sustainability with human health, because I think ultimately they really are one and the same. So to start off with, I think it's important to just set a baseline here of what exactly, sort of how I'm going to frame sustainability. Now, sustainability is somewhat of a limited term because I think in popular association, most people think that sustainability basically assumes that the best we can do is to maintain the status quo. And I don't think that's really a very sexy idea. And so I tend to talk more about restoration and talk about better use of products rather than necessarily sustaining. Because sustainability is then inherently subjected to a cultural baseline or a historical baseline. And so I think we need to have a discussion that broadens that baseline and looks back through history and also takes a look forward into really what we expect and what we hope to gain from our environments. Now, everything that we do has an impact, and I think it's up to us to acknowledge that that's okay, and that the purpose of sustainability or environmentalism, health, is really to minimize environmental impacts while at the same time maximizing the impacts that the products we use that they have on us, on humans. Now, this is a continuous and permanent process and something that we will be ever undergoing, this process of change. Now, all too often, I think environmental campaigns seek to solve acute issues with acute solutions. And this disassociation of solutions from this larger context in which they exist has led to, I think, a cascade of unintended consequences. A couple examples of that. Recycling, largely considered to be the most successful environmental campaign of all time. Reduce, reuse, recycle is now legislated into municipalities all over this country and globe. I mean, it's a fantastically successful public campaign. Except in the years since recycling has really been introduced wide scale, the pace and amount of recyclable goods flowing into our economy has actually risen. And so reduce, reuse, recycle forgot the first R, which was to refuse. That we should move away from recyclable goods, and then if we must use them, to reduce, reuse, and recycle them. Organic, better for me, better for you, better for communities, better for workers, better for the planet, right? It's a fabulous system. And yet we've created now cigarettes made from organic tobacco. Fair trade. We have, it's a brilliant thing. It's a fabulous, fabulous idea. And yet there are reports coming out of the Andes right now that there are villages and tribes in Bolivia and Peru that have sold 100% of their crop into the global market, basically to the US, thus sparking fears of hunger and malnutrition for an indigenous group of people that have for thousands of years existed basically on quinoa. But that's great, they're getting a good price, but it's also exacerbating some other issues. Now, I don't use these examples to point out flaws in the system. There's nothing wrong with recycling, fair trade, or organic. Those are very resilient and robust systems. I think the flaw is in our treatment of those systems and our expectation of them. Organic cigarettes, to me, is a real abuse of a really good system. Now, oftentimes, I think we forget to ask, just what it is we're trying to sustain. We get so caught up in the action that we don't look to the actual consequence. And I think the answer to that question broadly, though there are many for the sake of this conversation today, we are trying to sustain ourselves. The way we live, where we live, what we eat, how we procreate, we're trying to sustain the human reality on this planet. Now, if we acknowledge that it is ourselves that we are actually trying to sustain, then health, fortunately, becomes the main driver of sustainability. But when we talk about sustainable products, we often forget to talk about sustainable systems by which they make their way onto our plates and into our lives. And we very rarely talk about sustainable use. And this is especially in the environmental world. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, is a few of the opportunities that we have to look at not the technical solutions. How can we feed more people? Well, make more food. Oftentimes we think that's a technical solution. But there's another solution, which is to look at the resources that we already have and figure out how to use them better. So the first thing I want to talk to you about today is, well, I meant to delete that slide, the Harvard Healthy Eating Plate, just to link sustainability and environmentalism. Now I'm here to talk sort of from a chef's perspective, a user's perspective, on how to mitigate inflating prices. Well, great. If this is what's going to sustain humans, you know what? This is actually a perfect pathway to sustaining the environment as well. Right here, myplate.gov, the Harvard Healthy Eating Plate, pretty much tell you everything you need to know about sustainability in environmental terms. Now, as a restaurateur, this is exactly what I want my food costs to look like. Small portions of protein, the most environmentally costly foods, the most economically costly foods, fruits and vegetables, make up the bulk of the plate, whole grains. This is what is cheap. This is what should be making up the bulk of our calories. We know this from a health perspective. We talk about the difficulties in maybe enacting that, sure. But protein will always be the most expensive thing. And so from a restaurateur's perspective, this is about all we need to know. And this is not about organic or sustainable or local. This is about creating fluency in greens. This is about creating fluency in spelt and amaranth and quinoa and barley. That's where we need to focus first. Because right now, this country and this world doesn't have that fluency through which to understand larger and more complicated principles such as drivers of local economies, sustainable regionalized foods, and organics. In terms of better use of products, I don't know of a better example of this than the Peruvian anchoveta fishery. This is the world's largest single species fishery. It accounts for a full 10 to 15% of the entire global catch every year. Now, this quota fluctuates, certainly, so those numbers go up and down. 10 to 15% of the entire global catch. Tens of millions of metric tons of this fish. Now, don't think that this is actually how it gets caught, this quaint little fishery here, small boats. I was down in Peru with National Geographic, and I was here. I took this picture. Standing next to me was the Minister of Fisheries for Peru, Dr. Patricia Maluf. And she said that not one of these boats is on the records. So 10 to 15 million pounds plus. This is actually what the fishery looks like. Boats so big they carry 60,000 tons of fish at a time. They are so deep and wide they can't get anywhere near shore. They build these derricks and pipelines to pump the fish in from the boats. Wow, that sounds sexy, doesn't it? Pumping fish in. They get pumped into this facility here. Now, you don't often get access to these, but again, National Geographic is a really convenient little key to open doors. This is a fish meal plant. And you can see in the front right here, that big pot. That's basically a slow cooker. That's set it and forget it pretty much. It just winds around, slowly cooking them for 18 hours so the meal settles to the bottom. All those rank oils filter up to the top. This is after it's already been ground down into a mush, first damaged by the fishery. All right, that's not exactly what we think of when we think of fisheries, right? Well, and at the end of the day, this is how the product leaves the plant. Is that what you think of when you think of fisheries? A giant metal, post-apocalyptic factory-looking thing with a truck with bags of, Soylent Green or whatever it is. I mean, this is such a mystery product to us. Now, all of this product, of the entire Peruvian anchoveta fishery, 98% of it never feeds a human being directly. It goes into fur production, it goes into farmed salmon, pigs, chickens. It's in linoleum, moisturizers, and it's like corn. It's just omnipresent in absolutely everything. Now, this plant, 14,000 tons a day it processes. It employs 28 people. 12 of those are security guards. I walked down the street to a canning facility, and by the way, every time you eat a fillet of anchovy, somebody actually filleted that by hand. This processing facility processes 2 tons per day. It employs 150 people. And when you talk about a world of limited resources, this begins to look like a loaves and fishes story. Creating jobs, creating opportunity, economic development out of less and lower usage of environmental resource. This is what we need to be looking at, smarter and better usage of the products that we have. Now, when we look at fisheries, we tend to eat the large, charismatic species. We love them, swordfish, tuna, sharks, skates, marlins, woohoo! But the environmental cost of large fish is great. You have photosynthetic nutrients down here, phytoplankton, zooplankton. The next stage up in the trophic level, you have filter feeders, oysters, clams, sardines, mussels, herring, anchovies. All the way down on the end, you've got sharks and your top predators. Now, if you think of the trophic scale as a diving board, if you jump at the end of a diving board, what happens? You get the biggest splash you can make. If you jump at the base of it, what happens? Nothing. The system is built to absorb the impact. And unfortunately, fisheries are just hammering away at the end of that diving board. We need to jump a little bit further towards the middle. We need to be eating more clams, mussels, oysters, herring, sardines, mackerel, anchovies. These things that are biologically meant to be eaten. You ever seen a bait ball, those swirling balls of fish in the ocean? That's actually its survival mechanism. I'm going to breed with such fecundity that by the time you're completely satiated, I'm talking to a tuna here, that you're going to swim off and there's going to be enough of us left to carry on. That's their strategy. That's pretty cool. We need to take advantage of some of these natural resiliencies. Now, here's in America. This is, I think, 2008's fisheries landings. Now, the one I want you to look at is down the bottom left. Reedville, Virginia. 414 million pounds of seafood landed in Reedville, Virginia. That's one species, the menhaden. That entire fishery was worth $36 million. Do that math. It doesn't end up in a lot of jobs, a lot of houses, a lot of development, a lot of security. No. And you start doing the math on some of these other ones. We're not using seafood to its highest and best purpose of sustaining people. We have these irrational economies built around it that are actually not doing anyone any favors. And I know Dr. Cynthia Jones was talking about this morning. This is a better use of an existing resource. It's not quite enough. But certainly in a world of limited resources, we should not be engaged in equations that end in a negative. Another one that we need to look at is bycatch. In the United States, 1 million tons of seafood is discarded. In fisheries like shrimp, up to 10 pounds of seafood is discarded for every pound of shrimp you catch. Globally, almost 40 million tons of seafood. Now, this sounds like, oh, discarded, okay, those are big numbers and blah, 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 lots of hungry people. Well, this is what bycatch actually looks like. Now, the puffer fish in here, those are pretty obviously telling you don't eat me. But everything else in there, you got guitar fish, you got croakers, you got drum, you got menhaden, you got some other things in there, you got some, it's great, right? That looks like a fine dinner to me. Come over to my house and I'll convince you that each of those things is the most delicious thing you've ever had. Except that's really what bycatch looks like. That's pretty shocking. And when we talk about not having enough food, and yet we're practicing actively this, and this is in our country. This is what the U.S. looks like. Think about what it looks like in West Africa, where there's no laws, where there's no enforcement. We really need to begin to look at some of these systems and re-examine them. In the United States, we eat 10 species of seafood. It doesn't really change. Sure, clams and catfish sometimes get into it for number 10, but really, we eat 10 species of seafood. Of the 16 pounds on average that we tend to eat, actually only about 9 pounds of that, 8 to 9 pounds of that is actually only 3 species: canned tuna, salmon, and shrimp. There are 283 federally managed fisheries in America. with data, with management plans. We import over 1,700 different species to America alone, and yet we eat 10. The problem with this is that we have ended up hurting our fisheries. We've made cod king in New England. It's a great example. In a cod net, you know what comes up in a cod net? Cod, pollock, haddock, cusk, ling, wolf, dog, monk, skate, ray, eel, shark, all sorts of stuff. Guess what? All of those can be categorized simply as flaky white flesh fish. Tasty. And yet, cod is king. Cod commands $6 a premium at the dock. Pollock, you're lucky if you get $2. Dogfish, you're lucky if you break 10 cents. But each of these fish is equally profitable to the human body for the purpose of sustaining me. So why are we not setting up a system that it is equally profitable to a fisherman? We've created a system based on irrational demand that has put great pressure and strain on fisheries that is undue. This is what a fish market should look like. Is that what it looks like in your hometown? I mean, maybe the seals and the sturgeons, a couple of things in there shouldn't be there, but we should be participating broadly in the bounty of the seas. Now, I'm not saying we should just eat everything, but hey, if we were to actually pay for this, how many cod do you think that fisherman would have to catch to break even? I don't think we'd be in the quandary that we're in. Unfortunately, we're not just diving on the end of the diving board. We're just, injecting ourselves like lasers into the ecosystem and causing great detriment as the system crumbles around us. Now, it's this diversification that's really a lot of fun. Now, as I said, all of those species that come up in a cod net are pretty much white flaky fish, right? So when we go to a store, why do we say, I want cod? And so you're going to get whatever quality of whatever cod they're going to get, and probably is going to be pollock sometimes. Why don't we walk into a store and say, why don't you give me a flaky white flesh fish, the best thing you got that's most economical and fits my budget? Oh, then we're actually participating broadly in an ecosystem and allowing it to provide for us, basing our economy on supply and not demand. This has been very effective in some work that we've done with hospitals in Boston through the Center for Health and Global Environment. And they decided that they really wanted to menu seafood more often, but it was too expensive. They also wanted to look towards regional, localized fisheries, but they didn't know quite how to do it. So one day I went in there and I put cod and hake and cusk and haddock and ling and all these fish on one tray. I threw it in one oven, cooked it all for the same amount of time, pulled it out, and all the chefs and all the administrators tasted it all. Oh my God, this is delicious. What is this? Oh, that's dogfish. Oh, how much is that? It's $2.25 a pound for filet. What? Oh, okay. Now these hospitals are menuing seafood 4 times a week. They're selling more vegetables because seafood tends to go as a composed plate. They've reduced their menuing of red meat by 2 times per week. They've actually saved a lot of money. They've reduced their cost. They've upped the indices of healthfulness of the products that they're serving. Oh, and they've driven money, their purchasing dollars, directly back into their local economy. All because they were willing to say, send me flaky white flesh fish, instead of send me cod. Then these are little consumer tricks, and this is really easy things that we can do. The other thing that we've done with these hospitals is to begin to look at waste. A lot of times people say, oh, I can't buy locally sourced goods. I can't produce, I can't do sustainable seafood. It's too expensive. Fine. Let's go look at your trash bin. Let's divert your organic waste into a composting. Because waste is nothing but a misallocated resource. We all know that. So all of a sudden, they're getting paid to have their compost picked up. All of a sudden, they're not paying to have their trash picked up 6 days a week. They're going to get picked up once every 2 weeks. Oh, wow. All of a sudden, they actually hired a couple of people in the community with sustainable living wage jobs. They've actually been able to redirect those resources back into procuring sustainable and local seafoods. Now, the last thing I want to talk to you about today, and then I'll make way for Park here, is what was mentioned by Ms. Atwood about the Seafood Decision Guide. All too often, sustainability is seen as some sort of separate entity. And we stand on our pedestals and say, hey, listen to me until you see things my way. You should care about the oceans. But unfortunately, that doesn't really engender a lot of uptake in people. And so what we've done is predicated on the idea that I don't have your answer. Because food, aside from relationships, our intimate relationships, our friends and family, food is the most intimate relationship that we have. We put it inside of our bodies. It is the most subjective thing that we do day in and day out. So I don't have your answer, but I do have most of the information that I think you might be looking for to create the context through which you decide. So what we've done is created a food database. Sustainability rankings via the Monterey Bay Aquarium. We're not reinventing anything here, borrowing data. Omega-3 content via the USDA. Mercury level via Stony Brook University, and the food chain level. And what this allows you to do is turn on and off the filters as you want to populate fields so that you can make a decision based on your own context. Sustainability is not a fluency of doctors in the medical community, so we allowed them an easy tool to access the information. You can find that here at natgeoseafood.com, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you so very much.
Great, that was wonderful. Healthy systems. Now, Park, tell us, how does the price of things influence our decision-making?